My name is Arthur, and there are nights now when I sit awake in the dark replaying conversations that never should have ended the way they did. Not arguments, not screaming matches, just silence that lasted too long because neither person wanted to take the first step back. That's the thing nobody tells you about pride. It rarely feels ugly when you're carrying it. Most of the time, it feels like dignity, like self-respect, like strength. I believed that for most of my life, and by the time I understood the difference, there were people I could no longer apologize to. I'm an old man now, old enough to know that regret doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from stubbornness stretched across decades. I had a younger brother named Samuel. When we were boys, we shared a room so small that our beds nearly touched. Winters were cold in that house. The windows rattled when the wind picked up. We used to lie awake whispering about the lives we thought we'd have someday. He was quieter than me. I was the one who spoke first, fought first, decided first. Samuel had a gentler way about him. Even as a child, he seemed to understand people better than I did. Back then, I thought softness was weakness. That's important to admit now because it shaped the kind of man I became. Our father respected toughness above everything else. He believed emotions complicated things. If you were hurt, you worked. If you were angry, you stayed quiet. If you loved someone, you provided for them. That was enough. At least, that's what we were taught. Samuel never fit that mold completely. He'd notice when our mother looked tired. He'd sit beside her without saying much. He remembered birthdays, little details. He had patience for things I found unnecessary. I used to mock him for it sometimes, not harshly. At least, I didn't think it was harsh back then. But people remember the way you make them feel long after they forget the exact words. We stayed close through our 20s, close enough that I assumed we always would be. That assumption ruins more relationships than people realize. I got married first, bought a house first, started building what I thought adulthood was supposed to look like. Samuel moved slower through life. He worked different jobs, traveled occasionally, never seemed as concerned with status as I was. At the time, I judged him for that. Not openly. Pride rarely announces itself directly. It hides inside opinions, inside certainty, inside the quiet belief that your way of living is the correct one. I carried that belief everywhere. Family dinners became tense in small ways. Samuel would talk about taking time off work to travel somewhere, and I'd make comments about responsibility, about real life. Everybody would laugh awkwardly and move on. I told myself I was helping him grow up. The truth is, I needed to feel superior to someone. That's a hard sentence to say out loud, especially now. The first real fracture happened after our mother died. She passed quietly. Hospital bed, late autumn, nothing dramatic about it. Just a tired woman reaching the end of a tired life. Grief exposes people. At the funeral, Samuel cried openly. I remember standing beside him feeling embarrassed by it. Embarrassed for him. Embarrassed for myself because I didn't know how to comfort someone without feeling weak. Afterward, there was a disagreement about the house. Nothing enormous. Just practical decisions. Selling it, keeping it, money. But grief has a way of attaching itself to ordinary arguments and making them heavier. Samuel accused me of caring more about efficiency than memory. I accused him of being emotional and unrealistic. He said something I still think about. He said, "You always need to be right, Arthur, even when nobody wins." At the time, I dismissed it immediately because pride does not allow reflection in the moment. It protects itself first. We stopped speaking regularly after that, not intentionally. That's what makes it sad. There was no dramatic declaration, just longer gaps between calls, holidays skipped, messages answered late, years slowly hardening around two men waiting for the other one to soften first, and I truly believed time would fix it on its own. I believed blood was enough. It isn't. One Christmas, my wife asked if we should invite Samuel over. I remember exactly what I said. If he wants to come, he knows where I live. I said it calmly, like a reasonable adult. But underneath it was something childish and stubborn. I needed him to make the first move because apologizing felt too much like losing. That's what pride does. It turns love into a competition nobody survives. Years passed. Sometimes I'd hear about him through cousins or mutual friends. Small updates, new apartment, different job, health issues. I always told myself I'd call eventually. Eventually is a dangerous word. I saw him once at a grocery store after nearly 6 years without speaking properly. We were older by then. Gray hair beginning, slower movement, the kind of age where you start noticing mortality around the edges of ordinary life. He smiled when he saw me. That's the part that still hurts. There was no anger in him, no bitterness, just caution. We talked for maybe 3 minutes near the produce section like two distant acquaintances pretending history wasn't standing between them. When we were about to leave, he said, "We should get coffee sometime." And I answered, "Yeah, we should." Neither of us called. People think life changes through huge moments. Most of the time, it changes through ordinary moments you fail to handle properly. I carried pride into everything, into marriage, into fatherhood, into friendships. If my wife pointed out something hurtful I'd said, I defended myself instead of listening. If one of my children challenged me, I took it as disrespect instead of honesty. I confused authority with love for years. There's a loneliness that comes from always needing to protect your ego. You don't notice it immediately because people still gather around you. Family still visits. Conversations still happen. But slowly, people stop bringing you their deeper selves. They learn you care more about being correct than being close. And they adjust accordingly. I didn't see that happening while it was happening. That's the tragedy. By the time I noticed, everybody had become careful around me. Even my own children. My daughter once told me, very gently, "You make people feel like disagreement is dangerous." I laughed when she said it, actually laughed. I thought she was exaggerating. Now I think she was trying to save me years before I was ready to hear it. The older I got, the more isolated I became without understanding why. I still had family, still had routines, still had people who loved me. But there's a difference between being loved and being emotionally trusted. I had spent so many years protecting my pride that eventually people stopped trying to reach past it. And honestly, I can't blame them. The turning point came late. Too late, if I'm being truthful. I got a phone call from Samuel's daughter one winter morning. Her voice sounded nervous, careful. She told me Samuel had suffered a stroke during the night. I remember sitting down immediately because my legs suddenly felt unreliable. For several seconds, I couldn't even process what she was saying. All I could think was how much time had passed, how many years had disappeared while two brothers waited for the other one to bridge the distance. I drove to the hospital alone. The whole drive, I kept rehearsing conversations in my head. Apologies, explanations, ordinary brotherly things we should have said years earlier. I imagined us finally acting our age instead of our pride. When I entered the room, he looked smaller than I remembered. That happens sometimes when you see someone sick. The personality you carried in your memory no longer fits the body in front of you. He recognized me immediately, and he smiled. That smile nearly destroyed me, because after everything, he still looked relieved to see me. I sat beside him for hours that day, mostly quiet. Machines humming softly, nurses walking in and out, winter light against the windows. At one point, I apologized. Not elegantly, not in some grand emotional speech. I just said, I should have called sooner. He looked at me for a long moment and nodded slightly. Then he said, I know. That was all. No anger, no punishment, which somehow made it harder to bear. You spend years preparing yourself for conflict, and then life hands you kindness instead. There weren't many chances after that. His recovery was complicated. Some days he spoke clearly. Other days he barely had energy for conversation. I visited often, or at least what felt often compared to the years before. But regret changes the meaning of effort. What once feels generous eventually feels insufficient. Because deep down, you know you're trying to repair something after the damage has already settled into the foundation. One afternoon, while we were sitting quietly together, he asked me something I still hear in my head. He asked, why was it so hard for us to just talk? I didn't know how to answer, because the honest answer sounded pathetic. Pride, ego, fear of looking weak. Years wasted protecting imaginary victories, so I just stared at the floor and told him I didn't know. Maybe part of me still didn't. Samuel passed away the following spring. Peacefully, they said. I suppose that's comforting in some way. But peace for the dying doesn't always mean peace for the living. At the funeral, I stood near the back for a while watching people speak about him. They talked about his patience, his warmth, his generosity, and I realized something terrible. He had spent his whole life understanding people better than I ever did. Even as children, he understood something I didn't. That relationships matter more than pride. That closeness matters more than winning. I learned that lesson at the exact moment it stopped being useful. That's how life works sometimes. Now I sit alone more often than I used to. The house is quieter. My children still call. My grandchildren still visit occasionally. But I notice things now. The pauses in conversations. The caution people use when they disagree with me. The years of emotional distance created by my need to always appear strong, certain, unmovable. Strength can become a prison if you build your entire identity around never bending. I wish I had understood that earlier. I wish I had apologized faster, listened more carefully, allowed myself to be wrong without treating it like humiliation. Most people don't lose relationships in one catastrophic moment. They lose them slowly through pride disguised as principle. That's what happened to me. And pride is especially dangerous because the world often rewards it while you're young. People call you confident, strong-minded, tough. Nobody warns you that eventually those same qualities can leave you standing alone in quiet rooms replaying old conversations. If you're listening to this, I don't want you to think I'm asking you to become soft or passive or agreeable all the time. Life requires conviction sometimes. But there's a difference between having convictions and needing to protect your ego at all costs. I spent too many years confusing the two, and the price was measured in missed years with people I loved. The older I get, the more I realize how little most arguments mattered. The need to be correct, the need to have the final word, the need to avoid looking vulnerable. None of it kept me warm after the funerals. None of it made the house feel less empty. Now, in the evenings, I sometimes sit near the living room window after dark and think about my brother, about two boys whispering across a tiny bedroom while winter wind shook the windows. Back then, we shared everything. Then adulthood arrived, and somewhere along the way I started treating love like something that had to survive my pride instead of something more fragile than that. I know better now, but knowing better late in life has a sadness attached to it, because wisdom does not return time. It only changes the way you carry what remains. And what remains for me now are memories, silence, and the understanding that some people loved me long after I stopped making it easy for them to do so. Samuel was one of those people. I think about that often, probably more than is useful. But at my age, usefulness matters less than honesty. And this is the most honest thing I know.